Women are in a cult. That's not a joke. That's not an exaggeration. That's just a statement of objective fact. Women are in a cult. I know that might sound ridiculous at first blush, but it's true. Women are in a cult. And I'm speaking generally here. I know there are women out there that this does not apply to, but generally speaking, a very large proportion of women in modern society, globally, okay, not just in the West, I do think this is something that's going on all around the globe. A large proportion of the women living on this planet behave as if they all subscribe to a very specific set of beliefs. A set of beliefs that doesn't actually map onto our material reality. And that's what a cult is. But there's actually more to it than just that. I know there's 11 dozen different ways you could define what a cult is, but I really don't think I'm being out of line with the way I'm defining it. Because listen, the majority of women, or at least a very large proportion of women, do all subscribe to a similar set of beliefs. And I will get into that more specifically in just a minute. But the set of beliefs that make up the cult of the modern woman, these are extreme beliefs, okay? These are radical beliefs. And radical or extreme beliefs, that is one component that is commonly accepted to be part of what defines a cult as opposed to just a movement or a religion or a philosophy. And another component, the set of beliefs, the tenets that are followed by the cult of the modern woman, these beliefs are isolating and mentally damaging and just outright detrimental to not only the women that follow them, but also to the rest of society. So we have radical extremist beliefs that spit in the face of actual objective reality, and these beliefs are isolating and harmful to their own followers. So if that's not a cult, I don't know what is. And another thing is, if you ever dare to try to convince one of these cultists that their unnatural beliefs are wrong, then you're going to be met with intense wrath, denial, just fire and brimstone. Women are fervent about these beliefs. They are devout, okay? You can agree or you can disagree, but I'm about to lay out in detail exactly what the core tenets of this cult are. The cult of the modern woman. Tenet number 1. Women are an oppressed underclass. Perhaps the most foundational belief of the cult of the modern woman is this notion that women are a perpetual underclass. Women are oppressed. They've always been oppressed, and they are currently being oppressed. The way this belief works, no matter what happens, no matter what sorts of benefits and affirmative action women receive, no matter how much all the different institutions that make up our society all bend to the shape of women's desires, it's never enough. Women are oppressed. Women are the underclass. And that's it. That belief is infinite and unchangeable. And it's probably the main driving force behind all of the cult's actions. That's why women as a group make it their number one priority to control all of the systems, all of the institutions. They prioritize control over education, medicine, and legislation, to name a few of the big ones. It goes way deeper than that. It goes a lot deeper than that. But essentially, it's like any institution that governs what you are and are not allowed to do, basically just any institution that could afford them any level of control, that's what the cult prioritizes. Take the education system, for example. Education is dominated by women, especially at the youth level, because that's where their control, their brainwashing, is the most effective. Everybody knows that most teachers are women, and most of those female teachers are also very left-leaning, which, by the way, I'm going to be getting into more detail on this a little bit later, but the cult actually is not necessarily left-leaning, but that is how it presents currently, for the most part. I'll elaborate on that further in just a few minutes, but women already control the education system. Everything you learn throughout elementary school and high school and even on into college, everything is taught from the perspective of the cult. As in, everything you learn, it's all taught with the underlying assumption that women as a class are oppressed from every direction. Everything is viewed through that lens. But it's not just what you learn or what you're taught, it's how you're forced to learn. The actual methods of instruction, the way that assignments are structured, the way your performance is evaluated. It's all from a gynocentric perspective. So, how does this belief that women are an oppressed underclass play into all of this? Well, it's that belief, which the cultists do truly believe, by the way, with all their heart. Modern women aren't just pretending, they do actually believe these things. It's that belief that women are an oppressed underclass that is used as the justification to, for lack of a better term, to weasel their way into every single institution that governs our society and seize control. So the goal of the cult of the modern woman, if it can even be said that there is one primary goal, the goal is to benefit women at all costs. And I think it's also safe to say another goal of the cult is just to punish men. It does seem that the cult sometimes punishes men when it wouldn't even benefit them to do so, other than just for their own enjoyment. But maybe that's just a byproduct of engaging in such a devout cult where logic takes a back seat to the principles of the cult. But I don't want to stray too far off the topic here. The goal of the cult is to benefit women, and the means through which they achieve that goal is through subversion and infiltration and control. The tactics they use are manipulation of emotional and sexual energy, and the motivation is the sacred belief that women are oppressed, and they always have been. So there's a reason that this is the first core tenet of the cult that I wanted to talk about, and that's because it's probably the most important tenet. If women's belief in this core tenet started to falter, then the whole thing falls apart. So this is absolutely fundamental. And it's also the main concept that the cult tries to push on the youth. That's why control of the institutions, especially the education system, is so crucial to the success of the cult. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on any one of the core tenets. The cult of the modern woman, this is a rabbit hole that goes very, very deep. It's something that I could talk about endlessly because at this point, the cult pretty much controls all of society to such an extent that, if I'm being honest, I even start to question my own thoughts. Like, are these thoughts that I generated myself, or were these planted there by the cult's manipulations? Now, I don't really want to get into all that, so I'm trying to keep this somewhat brief. I want this to be informative more than anything else. This video is for educational purposes. But one last thing I will say on the topic of how women seek to control each and every foundational institution of our society. If you don't believe what I'm saying, if you think this is all just the ramblings of a confused inkwell, then just look at the numbers. In the United States, 77% of public school teachers are female. Only 23% are men. Women make up 80% of the total workforce of the medical field. Women are even the majority of medical school graduates these days. So pretty soon, there will also be more female doctors than there are male doctors. Men will probably continue to be a majority of surgeons, but that's only because the cult of the modern woman is mostly just concerned with control and power. As long as they have the majority of administrative roles in medicine, that's all that really matters. That's enough to allow them to make all the decisions. So all the difficult, esoteric, gritty, down and dirty, specialist surgeon work, yeah, let the men take care of all that. Let the men have that one. Okay, so women are the majority in the education system and the medical field. Now, let's talk about the legal field. In 1970, 3% of all lawyers were women. 3%. In 2024, 41% of all lawyers were female. Now, that's still not a majority, but it is a very fast rise. That is a very rapid increase. So give it another couple years, the majority of lawyers will be female. The cult has been able to take over these various institutions by enlisting the help of powerful men. They use this whole narrative of being the oppressed underclass to gain sympathy from powerful men, and that's how we end up with all these women in STEM initiatives and affirmative action and all that. Even when women become the majority, the initiatives never stop. And don't think we'll start seeing initiatives like that start popping up for men now that things are taking a turn. Now that the cult of the modern woman is gaining control, they're not going to give it up. In fact, you can probably expect to see more affirmative action initiatives for women. This is how they do it. They gain control of an institution through affirmative action propped up by their oppression narrative. Then, when they've successfully gained a majority power to the point that it cannot be denied, then they start to say, well, we need more black women in the legal field. We need more Latina doctors. So they just shift their strategy slightly, and they keep on chugging along, boosting up their ranks in every major institution in our society. So that's the first tenet of the cult of the modern woman. Women are an oppressed underclass, and they weaponize that belief to the fullest extent. Tenet number 2, attractive men are gods. All other men are predators. The cult believes that certain men are extremely powerful, and they believe that some use that power for good. So basically, any man that is highly attractive is essentially a god in the eyes of the cult. Now, he might be a benevolent god if he supports the cult, or he might be an evil, malevolent god if he does not fully support the cult. But attractive men are basically gods in the worldview of the cult. Now, if you're wondering how all other men fit into this picture, basically, regular men are demons. They're predators. Or at least we're assumed to be predators until we've proven ourselves otherwise. So, what exactly do I mean when I say that the cult views attractive men as gods? Well, basically, members of the cult cannot resist a highly attractive man. They'll do anything a highly attractive man wants. If a highly attractive man tells a high-ranking cult member, say a professor of medicine that sits on the board of directors for some Fortune 500 company, if a highly attractive man tells this powerful woman to put on a leash and eat out of a dog bowl and give him one of her credit cards, she'll do it. She can't help it. Women in the cult, that is, will do literally anything a highly attractive man wants them to do. And the only explanation for that is that, in their view, highly attractive men are gods. That's why a powerful woman will upend her entire life just to have the chance to maybe get a little bit of attention from a highly attractive man, even if that man on paper seems to not be very powerful. You know, he doesn't have a lot of money, or he doesn't have an influential job or anything. The only explanation is that the cult must view highly attractive men as gods. It's the only explanation. And by the way, I'm not a member of the cult, obviously. I don't have any inside knowledge of how the cult operates. So I'm just telling you what I know that I've been able to deduce from my own observations. But I think it is pretty clear that the cult views attractive men as gods because, speaking in general terms, the cult sees men as the enemy. Men are the primary antagonists of the cult. Yet, for highly attractive men, members of the cult will bend over backwards, or more often what they'll do is they just bend over forwards, and they even arch their back for highly attractive men, even when it doesn't seem like it would actually benefit them in any way to do so. You do often see that after a highly attractive man has had his fun with a woman and he stops paying her any attention and she realizes that she just got played, now all of a sudden she'll do everything within her power to slander that man. And she'll try to make sure he isn't able to victimize any other members of the cult. So, cult members are powerless to defend themselves against a highly attractive man. So, highly attractive men are seen as gods. Whether they're good or evil, they have infinite power over the cult. Think about the whole Westell McCaleb thing from a few years ago. Basically, a bunch of cult members on social media found out that they all got pumped and dumped by this one guy named Caleb, and then the whole cult was trying to take him down using the power of the internet. So basically, cases like this where women turn against an attractive man because he isn't playing along with their cult religion, how does that fit into the whole mythos? Well, he's still a god, but he's an evil god. Women still recognize that he is a powerful force, and they'll demonize him with their words if asked about him, and they might even try to smear his name publicly. But if any woman ends up in a situation alone with him, then he's gonna win. And the cultists recognize that. So, yeah, modern women view highly attractive men as gods. And I think that's one of the reasons that the cult strongly promotes the causes of alphabet people. Because the best way to reduce the power these gods have over the cult is to brainwash as many cult members as possible into believing that they aren't even attracted to the gods at all. You know, they promote this idea that cult members should either not feel romantic attraction at all, or they promote the incestuous idea that cult members should only be attracted to other cult members, and that men, gods and demons in their view, should only be attracted to other gods and demons. Now, I'm a little bit iffy on that last point because I do think, for the most part, the cult tends to use men's heterosexuality to their own advantage, to the advantage of the cult. But you can check the data, and it's pretty clear that the rise in women identifying with non-standard romantic preferences coincides perfectly with the cult's relatively recent rise in power. Okay, so these two things seem to be correlated. There seems to be a connection there. I have heard it said that the reasons these cult members will seemingly go against their best interests at times when faced with a Chad-like god might be because in reality what they're doing is they're harvesting a man's energy, or they're harvesting his life force or something like that. But I don't subscribe to that idea. I don't believe in any of that kind of supernatural energy manipulation and all that sort of thing. I just don't think that the cult operates under those types of beliefs. I think the cult of the modern woman more or less operates as a quote-unquote rational philosophy, as in, they obviously do have beliefs that aren't grounded in reality, but they don't really get into supernatural stuff. It's mostly a sort of secular kind of cult. So I don't think there's any beliefs in energy harvesting or anything like that going on behind the scenes. And if there was, I think that a lot more men would know about it. Now, as far as the concept that the cult views regular men as predators, or essentially low-level demons, I think it's pretty obvious. We don't really need to elaborate on that any further. If you live in this world as an average or below average looking man, then you already know how modern women treat you. And it's certainly not how you would treat someone that you respect as an equal. Tenet number 3, the mainstream is always right. This is the thing kinda underpinning the entire belief system, and if it sounds like it would lead to a lot of contradictory beliefs, that's because it does. The cult of the modern woman is a nebulous thing. It was actually really difficult for me to create this expose because something that might have seemed like a core doctrine of the cult 10 years ago could easily have been completely dropped by now. Or the cult might have even adopted a new position that completely contradicts their former position. And sometimes the cult will hold two contradictory beliefs at the exact same time. For a long time, I actually wasn't able to see the truth that modern women are in a cult because this shifting nature of the cult's belief system makes it difficult to identify that there is actually a core set of tenets that most women follow. But it all started to click when I finally realized there's not a lot of concrete beliefs held by the cult. There are a few, which I've been going over in this video, and one of those concrete beliefs is the belief that whatever the mainstream opinion is in society at the current moment, that belief is adopted by the cult until it falls out of the mainstream, at which point the cult will abandon that belief. You could argue that the reason that most women's opinions align one for one with whatever the mainstream opinion of the day is just because women tend to be more agreeable compared to men. But I don't really think that's true. I think women are very non-agreeable towards unattractive men on an interpersonal level. The reason that women cultishly adopt all mainstream opinions as their own is because it gives them more soft power or cultural power. Remember, the ultimate goal of the cult is to give women more power, more control. So, by simply agreeing with whatever the mainstream believes, individual cult members are able to ingratiate themselves with large amounts of people simply by sharing the same values. So, it's just a simple way of ensuring that they have as much power and influence as possible. It also has the added benefit of making sure that there is mass conformity amongst all cult members. Because obviously, we're talking about a cult here. Conformity is very important. Now, because of how powerful the cult is currently, they're actually at a point now where they're able to shape the mainstream narrative most of the time. So at this point, it's not as important for the cult to adopt mainstream opinions. The mainstream already reflects their opinions because they are essentially in control of the mainstream. And that has actually led to something that you could call cultural freeze on a large scale. You ever notice how every decade seems to have its own unique character? Like the 70s had hippies, bell-bottom jeans, corduroy couches, shag carpets, disco balls. The 80s had spandex, the whole Miami Vice aesthetic, glam rock, hair metal, new wave. I could name any decade from the 20th century, and you can immediately picture the fashion, styles, cars, clothing, music, and whatever else from that decade. But sometime around the 2000s, the 2010s, cultural freeze really started to set in. And, our fashion and trends and everything since then have sort of stagnated. There's probably a few reasons for that, but a big part of that is because sometime in the last 20 years or so, the mainstream narrative got to a point where all the cultural opinions and aesthetics are so feminized, everything is so gynocentric, that the cult of the modern woman no longer needs to change any of their minor positions to reflect the mainstream narrative because they're already fully in agreement. And the mainstream media apparatus isn't changing its narrative anymore due to the influence of the cult and its institutional reach because, they're already in lockstep on all the issues. So women don't need to change their opinion on things, and the mainstream media doesn't need to pivot any to appease the nagging of the cult. So our culture is just frozen in time. Culture has just stagnated. So, a very large portion of modern women are in a cult. And whether or not you agree that it's literally a cult, it is undeniable that these women are living as if they are in a cult. So I don't think it really makes much of a difference either way, if it's intentional or it's just a happenstance byproduct of human nature under the influence of estrogen. The results are the same. I don't think it's just women either. Even though the cult cultishly believes that all men are predatory demons unless they're super good looking, it's clear to see if you look around that a whole lot of men act like they are card-carrying members of the cult too. And that's usually just because these men want to get jiggy with some of the cult witches, They're desperate for any kind of female attention they can get, even if they have to essentially castrate themselves to do it. So it's not just women in the cult of the modern woman. It's most people, period, in our modern society that either are in the cult or they support the cult in some way. So I don't know. I think we're pretty much screwed, honestly. The cult of the modern woman is extremely powerful, extremely influential, and their influence is only rising. Their influence has only been on the rise. So I don't really see that changing. We're screwed.